Doom: The Dark Ages, id Software's latest entry into the franchise, is due to release on May the 15th on Xbox Series, PC, and surprisingly, PS5. Could this mark the end of the console wars? It certainly isn't the end of developers putting "the" in their game titles, like we all don't immediately drop it. Doom: Dark Ages looks absolutely insane, and I'm sure by this point you've seen the dev direct. However, they let some select content creators and journalists sit down and drill them about the game. So I have tons of juicy info for you all, including lore, difficulty sliders, ultra nightmare, the setting, new features, lessons learned, new weapons, the mech, the tech dragon, open world info, exploration power, the inspiration with the movie 300, melee weapons, hubs, campaign and level length, sequels, the new glory kill system, and much more. Let's begin. When asking about how the game dictates which melee weapon to use when the single melee button is pressed, the devs responded by saying you'll need to equip the weapon you want to use. For those who don't know, your shield and all its actions are on one button, and melee and all its actions are on one button, a way to streamline the control scheme, which they get into more soon. There are 3 melee weapons in the game, and much like switching out the equipment items in Eternal, you'll switch out melee weapons. So in the midst of combat, you won't need to worry. Each melee weapon has its own strengths and weaknesses, and you don't start with all 3. You start with the Gauntlet, which is sort of the quicker, lighter one of the group, which he loves to use even in the end game. You charge up their power, not unlike the way you did in Eternal. There's a good mix of what they did in 2016 and Eternal in this game, and it's safe to say that everyone will have their favorite melee weapon. Speaking of safe, today's sponsor keeps you more protected than any chainsaw shield and lightning gauntlet combo. Your PC and devices are constantly being targeted by thieves after your juicy data, and sometimes something far worse. Nord is the fastest VPN on the market and comes with built-in malware protection, which also automatically keeps you safe from pesky ads, data thieves, demons, and phishing scams. Okay, maybe not demons, but I like to think that they're the ones wanting to track what you're doing in the nasty corners of the internet. If you're online shopping, Nord can sniff out a fake store. If you're using public Wi-Fi, Nord keeps naughty fingers out of your info. Some people like using VPNs to get around location locks and watch whatever they want on Netflix, but you shouldn't do that. You should though go to nordvpn.com/Dantix and check out the best VPN on the market. So thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this video, and let's get right back into it. When asked about the custom difficulty sliders, the devs mentioned there are tons of things you can play with. One example is the game's speed. Yes, that means you'll run around, shoot, slay, and smash enemies off cliffs, either faster or slower depending on your tastes. You can also tighten or loosen the parry window. We saw in the gameplay trailer that parrying parts of the bullet hell type attacks from enemies will give you breathing room and or windows to counter attack. More on that later. If you're someone that doesn't like to parry, loosen the window. You can also change the damage you take. So if you want to increase the difficulty, a good place to start is to increase the damage you take. Enemies won't turn into bullet sponges, and you'll be rewarded for playing well by using your block strafing and parrying. So for more casual players or those in need of accessibility options, sliders are there for you. For hardcore players, sliders really let you ramp it up to increase these ridiculous situations that are impossible for the average gamer to complete. And I know you're all far from average. When asked why the switch to a medieval setting, the devs mentioned that they wanted to make this game from the beginning. They established the lore in such a way that the Slayer had a past to explore, a full realization of the Slayer's testaments. If you all remember, Doom Eternal had a multiplayer mode. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't know though, since it's entirely forgettable. When asked if Doom Dark Ages will have a multiplayer, the devs stated it will not. It's campaign only, and they made that decision from the jump. Completely unintended joke there from the devs, since jumping won't be a thing in this game. You're a tank rather than a fighter jet, so this 100% focus on the campaign has allowed them to make the biggest and best Doom game they've ever made. Another reason they held off on multiplayer was to free themselves to make the Atlan Mech and the Cyber Dragon. They're almost like minigames within the game. When asked how is Doom Dark Ages a reaction to Doom Eternal, the dev stated that it feels like the best Doom game they've ever made together. It's not just a tagline, they really feel it. It was their goal going into making this game. They learned from feedback that Doom 2016 was too repetitive. Doom Eternal was interesting, but some people said it was too hard. But the devs actually think that means it's too complex. The complexity of the control scheme led to unnecessary difficulty. You really want to be fighting the demons, not your controls or your personal demons. So Doom the Dark Ages will have an economic control scheme, fewer strings on the guitar, so to speak, as their goal was something that feels intuitive. That way, when they do pressure the player, they aren't reaching for buttons they aren't familiar with. They went back and played the original Doom and analysed why it stood the test of time. The devs also mentioned that an easier control scheme doesn't mean an easier game. It's just easier to get into, but still hard to master. Doom the Dark Ages will be more powerful and grounded than Doom Eternal. You won't have the acrobatics in this game. It'll be more return to form. It will be classic Doom in a lot of ways where strafing and shooting is more viable. There really wasn't any higher they could go with Doom Eternal and its gameplay loop. It reached the peak of what it could do. The devs mentioned that they could do the exact same thing again, but they want to improve and innovate. The core essence of being aggressive is still there, but you'll be dodging between projectiles, which wasn't as prevalent in 2016 or Eternal like it was in the originals. When asked about how the codex was taken out in place of cutscenes, the devs clarify that there will be still a codex, but it's less of a requirement to read it to understand the lore this time round. Out of the codex and into the cutscenes is really the goal. The story, if executed well, can enhance the experience. It shouldn't be a requirement that you read every codex in order to understand what's happening in the story. Then the devs finally get to my question. Can you talk enemy variety? How do they suit or adapt to the heavy feel of the Slayer? The devs mentioned it's their projectiles and movement. There are new chess pieces, as they call them, to help challenge the player. The board is flatter to make more space for that strafe to aim combat loop that we see in classic Doom. What you realize in classic Doom is that there is a lot of movement that is required to be successful, weaving through 3D smuck patterns on the way to dealing with the demons. They balanced the range of weapons to be medium to short range in order to encourage you to take the fight to the enemies. You can see in the gameplay that the spike launcher, for example, is affected by gravity very quickly after a set range. You have different melee options as well as your shield. If you remember, you have a Captain America style shield throw that returns to you at a medium range. You also have guns like the Skull Crusher that is very much a close range swarm destroyer. So there is a lot that's been designed to fit the loop. You'll notice that devs really didn't talk to enemy variety, even though it was kind of the core of my question. That's because my question was far too spicy for mere mortals. But we can expect many of the chess pieces to have evolved, and we get a hint of that in the gameplay, with demons that charge at you or ones with different coloured projectiles, and only a particular one can be parried back to them. When asked if this is an open world game, the devs responded with, no, definitely not. Most of us listening to the devs were sitting there thinking, well, I guess there are technically no stupid questions. The devs do go on to say it is, however, their most expansive worlds yet. It transitions from what they would call more linear areas to these sandboxes where exploration opens up and you get multiple objectives you can complete in any order. You really feel like you're on a battlefield. There's a lot of exploration in the game, but it's for power. Secrets in the game increase your Slayer's power. You're finding resources that help you improve yourself. Upgrade your guns, your shield, and your melee, so it isn't just for achievement. It's exploration for power. In another question, they answer that there is more collectibles total than in any other Doom before it, and they have more meaning. There's less currencies though, so it's more intuitive and less confusing. You're finding gold, for example, and the devs mentioned you know what gold does. It unlocks things. Well, that's news to me. Here I was thinking all that gold unlocks is a woman's leg. There will be places this game takes you to that the devs say is unbelievable. They know it sounds hyperbolic, but there truly are locations you've never been before. To follow on from that question, are you able to call in your dragon or mech, or are those only accessible at predetermined points? The devs responded by saying they are accessible at predetermined points. It really does make more sense that they're at particular points, since there will no doubt be a lot of areas that can't fit them. The Atlan mech, for example, is 30 stories tall. There are entire levels you'll play as the Atlan, complete with bosses. The dragon is a little different. You're piloting the dragon through levels with a good bit of exploration. In the gameplay footage, there is a floating city, and in that level, you pilot your dragon up, take out the demon's defenses, and then you land on it and board them. Fight your way through it and take them out from the inside, Then you leave and land on a different place in the city. You can do those objectives in different orders. There's also massive titans you can take out, so to reiterate, there are big, complete levels for the Atlan mech. In terms of the dragon, in the level you can jump on and off the dragon and generally take things at your own pace, but the mech and the dragon are pace breakers that are designed to be fast and fun moments. They have their own bosses, AI, and gameplay loops. When Lone Vault Wanderer asked about the decision to make the Slayer a tank rather than a more jump and shoot feel, the devs said they wanted to change the game but still make a Doom game. There has to be speed, exploration, and power, but they're okay changing what the power fantasy specifically is, especially if that change, as mentioned many times before, takes it back to classic Doom. They're competing for gamers' time, so they want something new but familiar. You're in a medieval setting, but it's sci-fi. You're a medieval superweapon fighting demons in a sci-fi world, and that sounds very fun to them. It's always where the Slayer was intended to be, and it fits within the prequel timeline, back in the time of the Sentinels. Then I was robbed of my question. The dev was in the middle of reading Ryan McCaffrey from IGN's question, but Ryan started editing it while the dev was reading it, cutting him off. The dev then had to read the highest upvoted question instead of IGN's, which just so happened to be mine. But the devs powered through it, only reading half of it. So now I've got beef with you, Ryan. I asked, is this the biggest Doom adventure yet? I actually asked more than that, but the devs responded to that specifically. They said yes, by a lot, especially when I used the word adventure. It's not normally a word you use with Doom games, but they mentioned they liked it and it really is an adventure. It's an epic adventure for the Slayer. Their words, not mine. They continue, from the worlds he ventures to piloting an Atlan, to taking control of a mecha dragon, to unfolding the story. It's truly like nothing players have had their hands on before in a Doom game. Are you all proud of me? I live for your attention. Now, they get back to Ryan's edited question. Was Quake 1 an inspiration considering the melee and setting? That's the question, yes. What a truly sublime question we all needed answering. Thanks, Ryan. The devs responded, not really. Yep, that's it. Then they had to try to wing giving us more information because they were held conversationally hostage by Ryan's fantastic question. Their inspiration was the Batman comic, Batman Year One. They were very close to calling Doom Dark Ages Slayer Year One, but they thought people wouldn't think it's cool. However, they recently read online that people thought it would have been. They say that Dark Ages is still good. See, even the lead developer dropped the from the Dark Ages. Another inspiration and critical piece of reference was King Leonidas coming out of the hot gates in the movie 300. The panning shot where he breaks out of the phalanx and takes out an enemy with his spear, then with his sword and shield, was one prime bit of inspiration. He made a meme internally for the team where he swapped out the sword with a shotgun. They think they did a good job capturing that feel. Another piece of inspiration was Frank Miller's Dark Knight, a more powerful, thicker Batman. Instead of a Ferrari, you're more of a monster truck. In that comic, the Batmobile is massive and everything is more heavy, which is the feel they're going for. When asked if there will be a hub like there was in Eternal, or more of a linear structure like in 2016, the devs responded by saying it's closer to 2016, meaning that yes, it will be more of a linear story from place to place, rather than going back to a particular spot, then set out again. When asked about how long a thorough playthrough would be, the devs responded by saying it's very long. They didn't want individual levels to be too long though. He gives an example of a previous game where one refinery level in a DLC got far too long, an hour and 45 minutes. They don't think that that's the right length for a Doom game's level. They think the sweet spot is around 1 hour. But it's a massive campaign for sure. It depends on how you're playing for exact numbers, but it's the biggest campaign yet by a large amount. So in my opinion, expect it to be well over 20 hours. When asked what type of challenges will be present for the player who wants to master the gameplay loop over hundreds of hours, the devs responded by saying it's the difficulty settings. You have your Nightmare, you have your Ultra Nightmare, and you have your difficulty sliders. You'll have Extra Life mode, which will be a little harder this time around. Trying to do Ultra Nightmare difficulty with the sliders working against you will be insane, nuts even. Increasing the game's speed and lowering the parry windows will give you razor thin margins. Then increasing the damage done to you, well, you can create a very challenging experience. The higher difficulty you go, the more active the enemies get. For the sake of demos, they play on Hurt Me difficulty rather than Nightmares. In another question, they asked if there's an enemy like the Marauder that will push the player, and the devs answered yes, several. They are the black belts on the battlefield, and they'll test your skill, knowledge, and your ability with the parry system. So there are enemies that throw combos, and you'll have to parry several in a row in order to falter them, though you can get by without doing so. Will Doom the Dark Ages get a DLC? It will, yes. Campaign DLC is actually part of the deluxe edition. When asked about the game being a good entry point and what would appeal most to new players versus veterans, the devs answered by saying it's the same thing for both. It's the combat. It's designed for everyone, and they don't think they can separate the two audiences. It's not like, for example, the iPhone is made for just some people. You could actually play it in chronological order, being Dark Ages 2016 and then Eternal, and they hope that the core pillars appeal to both audiences. When talking about the heavily criticized final boss of Eternal's DLC and what the devs learned from it, the devs responded by asking, well, what was criticized? If you're talking about the difficulty, it sounds like a bit of a skill issue and you could just get good. Obviously he was kidding, but was he, Ryan? The devs learned how far they can push the player and that you can't have a complex control scheme. When you streamline it, you can ask more of the player. Now, we mentioned the Skull Crusher before, but whose idea was that? The devs mentioned that they're all about ridiculous premise with sincere execution. But so many hands touch an idea, and he couldn't remember exactly who had the initial thought. When asked about the new glory kill system, the devs say it's very fluid. They want you to feel like a weapon of mass destruction, and when you look at the footage of Leonidas coming out of the hot gates, he's moving from enemy to enemy and taking him out in one fluid motion. With the synced glory kills, it snaps you to an enemy, player control is taken away, and it kinda breaks the flow. It's not an issue in 2016 and Eternal, as you're not taking out 3, 4, 5, 6 enemies at a time, but in this game, you are. It was important to be able to transition from melee to guns to shield play to an execution without there being a delay in action. You don't want to see multiple enemies ready to be executed, but the delay stops you from doing so. So they really lean on physics and animation teams for this game to make the glory kills look incredible. There are many times where there are multiple enemies staggered and you can just take them out in one run. This makes you really feel like Leonidas. They haven't even touched on the shield, which has a capacity to move you very fast. You lock onto an enemy, then pull in towards them, and then you have melee combos, stagger, and straight into a glory kill. So the momentum and speed you feel would be completely broken if you had to play out a synced animation. You can do the kills from any angle because it's physics based. There isn't an issue of repetition as well, which happened a lot with the glory kills of Eternal. When asked who composed all the music, the devs responded by saying it was Finishing Mood. They did the trailer they released back in 2024, and they did all the music in this current dev direct, and they're awesome. The devs can't wait for you to hear it all. Is Doom Dark Ages a conclusion to the trilogy or more of its own thing? The devs really can't answer that. There's clearly restrictions on what they can say. But the devs do say they like making Doom games, and they would want to continue to do it for a long time. The game isn't designed to be the end of something. And with that, it's the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring. For everything Doom and RPG, you're in the right place. Ciao friends.